Have you ever felt the crushing weight of helplessness as your own body betrays you? Let me tell you a story that keeps me up at night. Just last year, I witnessed my grandfather, once a towering figure in our family, try to lift his newborn great-grandson. His arms trembled with effort, and before any of us could react, the baby slipped from his grasp, landing on the floor with a heart-stopping thud. Thankfully, the child was unharmed, but the look in my grandfather's eyes still haunts me, a mix of shame, fear, and disbelief. That moment marked the beginning of his descent into physical frailty. At first, it was small things, struggling to button his shirt or tie his shoelaces. Then came the days when even walking to the bathroom felt like climbing Mount Everest. The most gut-wrenching part, watching him sit silently in his chair, refusing to ask for help because he didn't want to burden anyone. He feared becoming a prisoner in his own body, dependent on others for every basic need. One evening, as we sat together, he whispered, "I can't even take care of myself anymore." Well, those words hit me like a freight train. It wasn't just sadness, it was anger at aging, at life, at this invisible thief stealing his independence. Every stumble, every fall became a reminder of how quickly strength fades if left unchecked. And trust me, this isn't just about him. It's about all of us who dread losing control over our lives. It was a crisp Saturday morning when John, now 65, decided to tackle the simple task he had done countless times before, lifting the 20-liter water jug to refill his garden hose. But this time something felt different, wrong even. As he gripped the handle and tried to lift, his arms trembled violently under the weight. The jug slipped from his grasp, crashing onto the ground with a deafening thud. Water spilled everywhere, but what truly shattered was John's confidence in his own body. He stood there frozen, staring at the mess, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. "What's happening to me?" he whispered, panic creeping into his voice. For weeks, he had noticed subtle signs. The stairs seemed steeper, the grocery bags heavier. But this was undeniable proof that his strength was slipping away. What terrified him most wasn't just the physical weakness, it was the uncertainty of why it was happening. He ate well, didn't he? Meat, fish, eggs, all the protein-rich foods he thought would keep him strong were staples in his diet. Yet here he was, unable to perform a task as basic as carrying water. Desperation clawed at him as he realized how vulnerable he had become. The next day, still reeling from the incident, John visited Dr. Roberto, the cardiologist who specialized in aging-related issues. After hearing John's story, Dr. Roberto nodded gravely. "John," he began, "what you're experiencing isn't uncommon, especially for men your age. One major factor could be declining testosterone levels." John blinked, confused. Testosterone? Wasn't that something only young athletes worried about, Doctor? Roberto explained that testosterone plays a critical role in maintaining muscle mass and strength. As we grow older, our bodies naturally produce less of it, leaving muscles weaker and recovery slower. That's why tasks that once felt effortless now seem insurmountable. But the news got worse. Dr. Roberto ordered blood tests, and the results came back shocking. Despite eating plenty of protein-rich foods, John's body wasn't absorbing them efficiently. "How is that possible?" John asked, his voice tinged with disbelief. Dr. Roberto sighed. "Aging affects more than just hormones. It also slows down nutrient absorption. Your digestive system becomes less efficient at breaking down proteins, and extracting essential amino acids. Without those building blocks, your muscles can't repair or grow no matter how much protein you consume. This revelation hit John like a punch to the gut. All those meals he prepared so carefully, all those sacrifices he made to eat healthy, they weren't having the effect he expected. A wave of frustration washed over him. How could his body betray him like this? It felt like trying to fill a bucket with a hole in the bottom. No matter how hard he worked, progress eluded him. Doribarum, Dr. Roberto saw the despair in John's eyes and quickly added, "But don't lose hope yet. Understanding these factors gives us power to fight back. Yes, aging brings challenges, but they aren't insurmountable. There are steps you can take to slow down and even reverse this process." For the first time that day, John felt a flicker of optimism. Maybe there was still a way to reclaim some of his lost strength. John's world was already unraveling from the relentless grip of muscle weakness, but nothing could have prepared him for what happened next. One ordinary Tuesday morning, his mother, whose health had been slowly declining, called out to him from the bathroom. Her voice was shaky, laced with panic. When John rushed in, he found her sprawled on the cold tile floor, clutching her hip in agony. She had slipped, a minor misstep that wouldn't have phased her years ago, but this time it wasn't just a bruise or a sprain. The doctor later confirmed the worst. She had fractured her femur, one of the strongest bones in the human body. How could such a slight fall cause so much damage? It was a sobering reminder of how interconnected muscle loss and bone density truly are. The scene was harrowing. His mother lay there helpless, unable to get up despite her desperate attempts. Each effort ended in failure, leaving her gasping for breath and fighting back tears. "I can't move," she whispered hoarsely, her voice trembling as much as her frail hands. For John, watching this once resilient woman struggle like an injured bird trapped on the ground was unbearable. He felt a surge of guilt and frustration. Why hadn't they done more earlier? Could better nutrition or exercise have prevented this moment? As he carefully helped lift her onto a stretcher, her weight now alarmingly light compared to before, he realized how fragile life becomes when muscles and bones lose their strength. But the nightmare didn't end at the hospital. Days later, while recovering from surgery, his mother suffered another terrifying setback. Her blood sugar levels spiked dangerously high, sending her into diabetic shock. Doctors explain that weakened muscles play a critical role in regulating glucose levels. Without sufficient muscle mustus, the body struggles to process insulin properly. This revelation hit John like a second punch to the gut. Muscle weakness wasn't just about physical limitations. It was a ticking time bomb threatening other vital systems in the body. As they wheeled her into intensive care, John sat by her bedside, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions. Fear clawed at his chest every time the heart monitor beeped irregularly. Anger simmered beneath the surface. Anger at himself for not recognizing these risks sooner. Anger at the cruel inevitability of aging. And anger at the silent cascade of health issues triggered by something as seemingly innocuous as slipping in the shower. Yet amid all the chaos, clarity began to emerge. This wasn't just his mother's battle anymore. It was his own wake-up call. If unchecked, the same fate awaited him. The doctors warned John that osteoporosis often goes hand in hand with sarcopenia, creating a vicious cycle where weaker muscles lead to poor balance, increasing the risk of falls, which then result in fractures. And those fractures, especially in older adults, can spiral into catastrophic health crises. They emphasize that maintaining muscle strength isn't merely about mobility, it's about survival. Without intervention, the downward spiral accelerates. Broken bones lead to immobility, immobility leads to further muscle loss, and muscle loss disrupts metabolic functions, setting off a domino effect of complications. For John, this became a turning point. Seeing his mother lying there, hooked up to machines, dependent on others for even the simplest tasks, it shattered any denial he'd clung to. Aging wasn't just stealing her independence, it was robbing her dignity. But within that despair, he also saw opportunity. If knowledge was power, then understanding the connection between muscle health, bone density, and overall well-being gave him a roadmap to fight back, not just for himself, but for his family. John had reached a breaking point. After witnessing his mother's devastating fall and her subsequent hospitalization, he knew he couldn't sit idly by while the same fate crept closer for him. Desperation fueled his resolve. He wasn't going to let muscle weakness steal another piece of his family's independence, or his own. Armed with Dr. Roberto's advice, John decided to take control of his health through food, starting with something as simple as eggs. It felt almost laughable at first. How could such an ordinary item make any real difference? But doubt was no longer an option. Every morning without fail, John cracked 2 eggs into a pan, their golden yolks shimmering like tiny suns against the white. He ate them religiously, even on days when hope seemed distant. The first week passed uneventfully, but around day 15, something miraculous happened. Lifting groceries didn't leave him breathless anymore. By the end of the month, standing in his living room holding his newborn grandchild, John felt tears welling up in his eyes. For the first time in years, he could cradle the fragile weight of that tiny life in his arms without trembling or fear. "I did it," he whispered hoarsely, overwhelmed by both gratitude and disbelief. Eggs weren't just breakfast, they were redemption. Emboldened by this success, John moved on to the next recommendation: fatty fish rich in omega-3s. He bought a fillet of salmon, skeptical yet hopeful. That evening, as he savored each tender bite, he wondered if anything would change. Days turned into weeks, and one morning, waking up without the familiar ache in his joints, John froze mid-step. Was it possible? His chronic inflammation, the relentless companion that had dogged him for years, was fading. Climbing out of bed felt easier than it had in decades. A wave of astonishment washed over him. How could something as seemingly mundane as eating fish rewrite the script of his body's decline? But the true turning point came when John added legumes to his diet. At first, he hesitated. Beans? Lentils? They seemed too humble to hold transformative power. Yet, desperate for progress, he began sprinkling chickpeas onto salads and stirring lentils into soups. Within weeks, John noticed a shift, not gradual, but seismic. One afternoon, after playing with his grandson upstairs, he realized he'd descended the staircase without stopping to catch his breath. Stunned, he gripped the railing, heart pounding. Not from exertion, but from sheer joy. This wasn't just physical improvement, it was liberation. Every step forward felt like reclaiming a stolen piece of himself. As these small victories accumulated, John's confidence soared. Each meal became more than sustenance. It was a weapon against aging, a shield protecting him from the fragility that had once seemed inevitable. When he blended spinach into his morning smoothie, he imagined its nitrates coursing through his veins, fueling his muscles. When he sprinkled walnuts over his yogurt, he pictured vitamin E soothing his arteries, guarding his heart. Food, once merely functional, now carried purpose. It wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving. Still, there were moments of doubt. Some nights, staring at the ceiling, John wondered if this battle against time was futile. Could nutrition truly outweigh genetics? Then he'd remember the way his arms steadied when holding his grandson, the absence of pain in his knees, the newfound ease in climbing stairs, and he'd remind himself every choice mattered. Even the smallest steps forward were worth taking. By the time John stood before his mirror one crisp autumn morning, flexing muscles he hadn't seen in years, he barely recognized the man staring back. Gone was the defeated figure who once struggled to lift a water jug. In his place stood someone stronger, not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. He understood now that fighting muscle weakness wasn't just about regaining strength. It was about reclaiming dignity, freedom, and the ability to live fully. John had finally found his stride with nutrition. Eggs, salmon, spinach, these foods were no longer just ingredients. They were lifelines pulling him back from the brink of weakness. But as he stood in front of the mirror one morning, flexing muscles that were slowly regaining definition, a sobering thought struck him. Food alone wouldn't be enough. Dr. Roberto's voice echoed in his mind. Strength isn't built at the table, it's forged through movement. The challenge now was clear. John needed to exercise. At 65, stepping into a gym felt like walking onto a battlefield unarmed. His body, though stronger than before, still bore the scars of decades of neglect. The idea of lifting weights or doing squats seemed laughable, a cruel joke played by time itself. Yet there he was, standing in front of a rack of dumbbells, gripping a pair of 5-pound weights like they were anvils. He hesitated, fear creeping into his chest. What if he fell? What if his knees buckled under the strain? But then he remembered his mother's fractured femur, her fragile frame lying helpless on the bathroom floor. That image steeled his resolve. If not for himself, he would do this for her, for everyone who deserved better than surrendering to age. The first few days were brutal. Every squat sent waves of pain radiating through his thighs. Push-ups left his arms trembling so violently that he could barely lift himself off the ground. Even simple stretches made him feel like an old rubber band stretched beyond its limits. By the end of each session, exhaustion overwhelmed him, and doubt crept in. Was it worth it? Could his body really adapt after all these years? Nights were the hardest. Sleep eluded him as every muscle screamed in protest. He woke up stiff, sore, and disheartened, wondering if he was fighting a losing battle. But something remarkable happened on the 10th day. As John reached for the same 5-pound dumbbells that once felt impossibly heavy, he noticed a subtle shift. They weren't exactly light, but they didn't crush him anymore either. Encouraged, he pushed through another set of bicep curls. Then came day 14, the moment that changed everything. Standing in front of the mirror, he picked up a 10-pound weight. For weeks, it had mocked him from across the room, a symbol of strength he feared he'd never reclaim. But today was different. With gritted teeth, he lifted it and held it steady. Tears welled up in his eyes. It wasn't just about the weight, it was about proving to himself that progress was possible. That night, as he sat down to journal his journey, John reflected on how far he'd come. 2 weeks ago, climbing stairs had been a monumental task. Now he could lift weights without collapsing. This wasn't just physical growth, it was mental resilience. Each rep became a declaration of defiance against aging, a reminder that while time might steal some things, it couldn't take everything unless you let it. Still, setbacks loomed. One evening mid-workout, his knee gave out during a lunge. Pain shot through his leg, and panic surged within him. Had he pushed too hard? Would this derail all his progress? For a moment, despair threatened to swallow him whole. But instead of giving up, he rested, iced the injury, and consulted Dr. Roberto. Listen, the doctor said firmly, setbacks are part of the process. Don't confuse them with failure. Those words reignited John's determination. He adjusted his routine, focusing on low-impact exercises until his knee healed. When he returned to lunges weeks later, he did so with newfound caution and confidence. By the time John completed his first full month of consistent training, he realized something profound. Exercise wasn't punishment for his aging body, it was liberation. Every drop of sweat, every ache, every triumph reminded him that he was alive, not merely existing, but truly living. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, he faced it with hope, knowing that every step forward brought him closer to reclaiming not just his strength, but his dignity, independence, and joy. John stood in his kitchen one Sunday afternoon watching his 70-year-old mother chop vegetables with steady hands. The rhythmic clinking of the knife against the cutting board was music to his ears. Just a year ago, this scene would have been unimaginable. She had barely been able to lift a spoon without trembling, let alone prepare an entire meal. But now, here she was, strong, independent, and cooking for her family. It wasn't magic or luck that brought her back from the brink. It was discipline. Discipline born out of desperation, forged through hard work, and sustained by hope. As John looked at her, he realized how close they'd come to losing this moment forever. "Don't wait until it's too late," he whispered under his breath, as if speaking directly to anyone who might doubt their ability to change. He thought about all those mornings when he cracked eggs into a pan, wondering if it would make any difference. He remembered the days when climbing stairs felt like scaling a mountain, each step heavy with fatigue and frustration. And yet, here he was, standing tall, breathing easier, and stronger than he'd been in years. His journey hadn't been easy, but every ounce of effort had been worth it. Every rep, every nutrient-packed meal, every bead of sweat told a story of resilience, a testament to the power of taking control before time took everything away. But what haunted him most were the stories of those who hadn't acted soon enough. Friends who ignored the warning signs until they could no longer button their shirts or walk unaided. Neighbors who dismissed muscle weakness as just part of aging, only to find themselves trapped in lives of dependency. These weren't distant tales, they were stark reminders of what awaited anyone who refused to act. "If you don't start today," John said aloud, his voice trembling with urgency, "you risk losing more than strength. You risk losing your freedom, the freedom to care for yourself, to live life on your terms." He turned back to his mother, whose laughter echoed through the room as she joked with her grandchildren. Her smile carried a weight far greater than joy. It carried defiance. Defiance against the notion that aging must rob us of our independence. For years, she had feared becoming a burden to her family. Now she was feeding them, not just with food, but with inspiration. Each dish she prepared symbolized victory over weakness, proof that even at 70, life could still be lived fully. John knew the road ahead wouldn't always be smooth. There would be setbacks, moments of doubt, and days when progress seemed invisible. But he also knew this: waiting was not an option. Muscle loss doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It creeps in quietly, stealing bits of your strength until one day you wake up unable to do the things that once defined you. By then, reclaiming what's lost becomes infinitely harder. So to anyone reading this, John's message is clear. Start now, not tomorrow, not next week, now. Your body is listening, even if you aren't. Feed it well, move it often, and fight for every ounce of vitality you can hold on to. Because trust me, the alternative isn't worth imagining.